Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, March 22nd, 2024, and today we're going to be talking about the House Republican slim majority that is getting slimmer and slimmer as unexpected retirements pop up all across the House of Representatives now today, with the narrowest majority possible for the Republican Party of just a vote margin of 1. Now, in this decision, this is Mike Gallagher, a representative from the state of Wisconsin, who joins the number of ranking Republicans who have decided to leave the House of Representatives over the past year. A major decision that puts the Republican Party and its majority ultimately in jeopardy, as heavy indicators across many former representatives seem to suggest that there are future representatives who are going to retire in the next coming months. Now, this decision to leave in office means that he will be leaving the House of Representatives in April. He will not be serving out his full term until the month of January of 2025, and it leaves a lot to be desired for the Republican Party as their House majority started off very slim back in 2022. We remember the House majority was 222 seats for the GOP and 213 for the Democrats, but the majority now today stands with Republicans at just 218 seats in the House of Representatives, with a vacancy of 4. And what it means here is that Democrats have all of their seats filled, 213 out of 213 that were elected back in 2022. Now in 2024, with Republicans down to just the exact number necessary for a majority in a House of Representatives with 435 seats, puts the Republicans in an unfortunate position in the event somebody else retires or resigns from the House of Representatives. But I think these House retirements, or these House resignations, I think that's a better way of putting it, because a retirement suggests that they won't be running, but they'll be serving out their full term, has been the start, has been the continuation of a trend that we largely saw started when Kevin McCarthy decided to resign from Congress. Now, Kevin McCarthy, arguably somebody who has been through a lot when it comes down to the House, served in the minority leadership position role for the Republican Party for years on end, then became the, House Speaker for the briefest period of time in U.S. history, and became the first House Speaker to actually be, completely pushed out of Congress or, expelled from his position as Speaker of the House, removed as Speaker of the House. This has never happened in U.S. history. And so you find here that Kevin McCarthy decided, you know what, I'm out. And that by the end of December of 2023, he decided he was going to resign from Congress. And to this day, his seat has yet to be filled. And so the race is expected to go into a runoff around May 21st, I believe, is the day. And it's easily going to go to the GOP. Both candidates on the runoff ballot are Republicans, and the vacancy will in fact be filled by the time we reach the election. The chances of the majority flipping in favor of the Democrats are very, very slim. But what isn't slim is, or what is increasingly slimmer, is the House majority for the Republican Party, and the indicators that these House resignations sort of tell us about what we can expect to see this coming November. Retirements and resignations are never a good sign for a party in power, because it means that people are leaving for a reason. While I'm sure there are plenty of reasons related to the continuous votes on the House speakership, or now the new decision for Marjorie Taylor Greene to actually go ahead and, put Mike Johnson back up for a potential vote for, ousting him as House Speaker. Democrats have said that, for them, they aren't going to do that just yet, that they might table this effort or decide to do it after Easter or make it conditional on aid to Ukraine or whatever they're deciding to do with how they're going to maneuver this. But Marjorie Taylor Greene seems to be setting the stage for yet again another speakership fight and another, vote on whether or not he's going to be ousted. A vote that many people are also arguing, despite some Democrats' efforts to intervene, that a lot of Democrats are going to vote in favor of ousting Speaker Johnson. Now, we will see what happens. I think it's not a guarantee, in any way about what happens in the House speakership vote. What happens with Mike Johnson, we could easily see this, pushed off, but I can't imagine that this is helping the case of Republicans out there that are considering that they're going to leave. You saw people retire from the House back in February. You saw it in January. You saw it happen recently, in early March, and now it's happening again with Mike Gallagher, and now there are indications here that, based on what Ken Buck has said to reporters here, that, it's not just him. Republicans should be worried about the 3 that are following after him. And now it seems as if one of the 3 was Mike Gallagher, but the expectation here, based on what he's saying and leaking to the press, is that there's going to be 2 more resignations ahead of this coming election year. Which means there's a strong possibility, depending on when they choose to resign from the House of Representatives, that, this House goes into a point where Republicans are not in the clear-cut majority. They would still have the plurality and still win, in theory, of voting members, the majority of votes, but they wouldn't have the majority in the way that it was elected for them back in 2022. And I think when you see that many of these Republicans are deciding to jump ship, there's a reason for that. I think what we have found is that the Republican Party has been deemed so inefficient by their own party members, people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert, who have come out publicly and, railed against Republicans, saying that they're ineffective. They can't get anything done. They can't work. They can't deliver their promises to the American people. The Republican Party has a PR problem when it comes down to the House of Representatives, and these continuous resignations make their jobs more difficult and just don't tell a good story. There's two sides to it here. When voters out there are getting continuous updates that the House majority is falling apart, or that committee chairs are retiring or resigning from the House and leaving so early on one hand, it feels like, they're jumping ship. They see this as a sinking one and are deciding that, we're going to get out of it before we're swept under the rug by whatever comes this November election. I don't necessarily buy into that as much, just because a lot of these resignations are happening in safe red districts, or arguably, very strong districts for the GOP. But I do think there is, a side of it where they're deciding, it isn't just about saving face in their district. It's about saving face as a national GOP figure. And maybe this is not something they enjoy, they want to be part of. And honestly, it seems like a very tiring job, especially when your party is perceived as a party that's doing nothing, perceived as a party that is limiting what's happening with immigration, the border, etc. Right? I think a lot of these people genuinely do go into Congress with the idea of serving their community, doing better for those back home. It's not entirely power grabby for everyone in Congress, and I think you often find that those people tend to crack first and decide that they don't want to stay in Congress, that this has gone beyond their mission of politics and public service. And I think that's what you're starting to see happen here. I'm not going to speak on the political ideologies or the stances that these people have taken, but I think there's a reason they're leaving. And I think that's one side of things. The other side of things is that this is, beyond just bombardment of the press, bombardment of media surrounding this. I just generally think that this is just something that the Republican Party needs to maintain, needs to keep a tight ship, because otherwise it makes them look very unelectable, makes them look very, poor candidate, as poor candidates for 2024. I think given how narrow their House majority was in 2022, nothing can be left to chance. It isn't just the fact that, they are as a cohesive party and a unified party. It's also the fact that incumbents rarely lose re-election in an upcoming congressional bid. You often find that districts are drawn to keep the incumbents there for year after year after year, and this might give Democrats some opportunities to move into some districts or move into some areas and narrow them up, force Republicans to spend, and ultimately make these races more competitive than they needed to be had these sometimes popular incumbents decided to stay in the race. I think this slew of retirements also feels very reminiscent of 2018, when you saw as many people as they did decide that they weren't running for re-election in the House of Representatives. You can see here that in terms of retirements, there's a crap ton. A bunch on the Democratic side, a bunch on the Republican side, but it's a difference to be retiring than to resign entirely. It's a difference to say, I'm going to leave and run for Attorney General, or I'm going to leave to run for governor or run for U.S. Senate, or whatever you might be doing. It's a different thing when you have all these other people that are just simply retiring. Very few are running for U.S. Senate. Very few are running for statewide elected positions. And I think that's a problem for many of these Republicans here, that for many of them, too, they're in competitive districts. You look at people that are up across the United States that are in positions of power, in committee chair positions. They are coming into this with a stance and a strong position for re-election, and they're deciding to leave. And I think a lot of it has to do with the inefficiencies and how they're upset with the House Republican Party. And that's a problem for them. Because looking ahead to this November, their path to the majority maintains itself as very, very slim. Regardless of what happens in these special elections, which there are plenty of them that are coming up, in New York's 26th, California's 20th, Ohio's 6th, Colorado's 4th, and then of course the one now in Wisconsin's 8th with Mike Gallagher, the list is going on. But it means here that these candidates aren't going to be as well known as incumbents, aren't going to be as strong as incumbents, and that's a problem. Because what it does here is make these candidates less, viable for the general election. They're all coming into relatively strong districts here, but it's still going to be a problem, and I think we are going to find that to be something that Democrats look at and reflect on and say, you know what? This is a race that we otherwise would never be able to be competitive in. This is a race that we otherwise would never have a shot in, but we have a chance in the special election. We can narrow it down, and Democrats can show you that in years past, in 2017 and 2018, going into those midterm elections, some of those very early warning signs that these races were going to be competitive wasn't that Democrats won them, but it was that they narrowed them down. And then eventually, they became more competitive. For instance, South Carolina's 5th District, one of the earliest special elections in the 2017 campaign cycle here. This is a district that Ralph Norman went on to win in 2020 by a very strong amount, 2022 even. Let's see, or I guess he decided to leave Congress. Or no, he's still in Congress. Where is his electoral history? I'm trying to find because there was a bit more to say, but I guess 2018 is a good example. It was a margin around 15 points. It was larger in 2022, but we can get into that at another point. Let's go back to some other special elections. These were early indicators. The Democrats were going to do well. Georgia 6th, you know who ran in that race, lost it, but still narrowed it up from what was a 30-point advantage down to just a few percentage points. Now Senator Jon Ossoff, right? So when we see things like that, we start to build up this case here back in 2018 that the blue wave was predictable. The blue wave was expected, and a lot of it did have to do with resignations and early retirements, and ones that gave Democrats the opportunity to narrow down races, the opportunity to organize, and the opportunity to display just how much energy and enthusiasm was on their side. And I think you might actually find that in these House elections, just as you did in 2022. Republicans may have been able to win back control in 2022 from the Democratic Party, but they severely underperformed expectations. Whether that was the Senate, whether that was the governorship, whether that was the House elections, all around, the Republican Party did not perform as strongly as they should have. And I think a lot of that had to do with candidate quality. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the GOP was not putting up their best. But how easy is it to put up your best in certain situations where incumbents are leaving with months before the filing deadline or weeks before the filing deadline? And a special election has to take place, and more often than not, it's the same exact candidates in the regular election. And if you nominate some crazies or if you nominate some, more out there candidates, you will often find that they perform poorly and just overall reduce the amount of Republican support. But I think that's, just one of these many, many takeaways that we can see as we have this House majority getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And as we've seen right now with Ken Buck, the Colorado 4th representative who teased that there could be as many as 5 other House Republicans resigning after him, not retiring, but resigning, means there is a circumstance, should he be correct, that the House of Representatives majority narrows down to being a tie, with Republicans and Democrats at equal points, or depending on the filling of the vacancies in these special elections and these congressional districts, that the majority is narrower than it has ever been. This is an exceptionally close race in 2024, and every single thing matters. Democrats are unified, and their resignations and their retirements are far and few. And the reason for that is because they run a very tight and close ship. That's exactly how Democrats have been able to maintain consistency with Hakeem Jeffries in the speaker vote in 2024. That's how they've been able to maintain themselves in terms of an overall delegation that has been nearly entirely in place, with the exception of congresspeople who have passed away or congresspeople that have all of a sudden gotten up and left. You find that way more on the Republican side, and I think it's an indicator of the culture and potentially lackluster predictions for this coming November in terms of election results. No one wants to serve in Congress in the minority, and if they feel as if it's already going to be a Democratic majority, well, then it really begs the question, is there a point of being in Congress anyway? Especially when your previously fearless leader decides to leave Congress entirely. That's another point that I look at and say, this wasn't good for Republicans. It was very similar and very reminiscent to what we saw when Paul Ryan, who at the time was the sitting Speaker of the House of Representatives, that he chose to retire that coming November, that he was going to leave in the Wisconsin district that he represented. I believe Wisconsin's first district here. It was major, major news because everyone was looking at it and saying, for all this conversation and all this talk around House resignations, House retirements, whatever you want to call it, because he didn't leave before his term earlier. So he decided to, retire in the House of Representatives. All of this came up in conversation because Paul Ryan made the move. There were 40 House retirements, but Paul Ryan's was the most important because it showed that the Republican Party, even at the very top, many of these representatives had yearned for a time in which they did not have to serve in Congress and did not want to serve in a future Democratic Nancy Pelosi controlled, now would be Hakeem Jeffries controlled House of Representatives. And that's exactly the problem that Republicans now face today, with a very strong possibility that this upcoming House is a lot more blue than it is red. And I think that's the problem that you see lies in here for the Republican Party and for all of these representatives. So as we continue to discuss House projections and the ability for Republicans to maintain control of the House of Representatives, their chances become bleaker and bleaker. If they can't even maintain House control with all of their incumbents, what's to say they will do it this coming November election? Of course, time will tell, and we will see that with time going on. But I find it to be a fundamental problem, and I think a problem that should very much terrify Republicans going into this November, that so many of their members, in an entirely unexpected fashion, have decided to leave office, decided to entirely remove themselves from the House GOP as the majority gets narrower and narrower, and might set up things like Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to oust Mike Johnson as a speaker becoming more and more possible and plausible, and ultimately ridiculing the Republican Party and ruining their credibility in such an important and crucial election year, right at the time where Democrats are seeing improvement in the generic ballot polling. It's a perfect storm here, similar to what happened in 22, and honestly would be not shocking if Democrats maintained or expanded into House control after this election, especially given everything that has transpired under the modern-day GOP. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you can watch for 200... Whoa, I was an autopilot there. A playlist for you to watch on the 2024 House elections. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.